some things in this town you're just not supposed to say, like, how much have we given Ukraine so far? And when does this end? And what does victory look like? And should we continue to sort of say that we're going to support Ukraine no matter what the cost, no matter what they need? You're not allowed to say things like that. And by the way, just because you ask those questions doesn't mean that you don't support the people of Ukraine who have been invaded by a hostile foreign country. It doesn't mean that suddenly you're a puppet of Vladimir Putin. You know, you're just sort of asking, when does this end? And what's America's interests? And can we define exactly what we're doing here? And well, let's ask all those questions with Tony Shaffer, retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army, CIA-trained intelligence officer. Tony, I'm not kidding. You're not allowed to say these things. They can start calling you names.
Look, I've been on a couple different networks, and every time I say something that's halfway prudent and rational, I'm accused of loving Putin. It's like,
yeah.
No, it's not. No, I'm simply saying that my first interest, based on my oath, is the United States. That's just the way it is. It's kind of like it's in my oath.
Yeah.
And so when I examine these things, Larry, I examine them from the policy perspective and the practical perspective regarding how does this benefit the United States.
Well,
and so at
this is why I was intrigued to see this headline come out of NBC News over the weekend, where cracks are starting to show now. U.S. officials, apparently out of the Pentagon, have made it known that they're not thrilled with the idea of upping the next level of military aid to Ukraine in the form of M1 tanks. You know about this story. Explain to me what you're reading when you see this story.
Well, let's go through the tactical first and go to the strategic and policy. So tactically, these things are a mess. Larry, you have to establish a long and arduous chain of logistics from the United States into Ukraine to even get them there. Once they're there, these things are not well suited for the terrain in Ukraine. These things are over 50 tons. Russian tanks, Soviet tanks are below 50 tons, which makes them more viable for the region. And obviously, it takes time.
Can I ask why? Is that because of the ground? The ground. If it's heavier, it'll sink. Is it that simple?
Right. The terrain is just not good because it is very soft. The Germans found this out during World War II. The big, heavy Tiger tanks don't do well there.
Okay.
And so, and of course, on top of that, then, is the training. It's like, you know, I've driven a tank. It doesn't take long to drive a tank and learn it. I've done all sorts of that. But to learn how to use that tank as part of a unit, that unit is part of an army, and then train people up to do everything that from soup to nuts to get it to work, it takes time.
So in other words, it's not like sending them guns and grenades. If we commit at this level to an M1 tank,
you're committing to a war.
We're committing to our participation in terms of training and support and logistics and everything. It's a huge, huge upgrade of our commitment to the Ukrainian effort.
Which brings me to the policy piece. Do we want to do this level of commitment for a nation which is not a NATO nation, and we have no in-state objectives that we've assigned ourselves to say, hey, this is what we consider our military objectives assigned to the Ukrainians as a proxy? That, Larry, does make us a combatant in the fact that you've now essentially anointed the Ukrainians as your proxy army, which is not what we want to do. I am no fan of Putin. Putin is a thug. What he did is wrong, but it's not our job to go in and pick a fight with the Russians without understanding what the consequences will be to the United States and our population, especially if there's a potential, and there is, of an escalation to a nuclear exchange, which I think everybody would agree with me we don't want to do.
No, I would think not. Tony, I don't understand, though, because we've already committed to missiles and all of the training. And the last time we had you on this program, it was about Ukrainian personnel coming to Oklahoma to train on the missile systems that we've given them. It almost makes it sound like the commitment of tanks would actually be more serious than missiles.
It is, because those are considered to be offensive weapons. Remember, Larry, a tank by itself with no support is essentially a big pet rock that you can take care of and nurse and hang out in, you know. But if you turn it and make it effective, it's part of a larger armed force that armor's job is to punch through and go on the offense. So again, what Milley has said, and this goes back to the article you mentioned. Milley says, well, there's a possibility to return to the offense. That's what we're talking about here. These things would be necessary for them to return to an offense. Otherwise, They're continuing to have very much World War I-like trench
Yeah.
warfare and Bakhmut and other places at this point in
Let
time.
me just understand when you say this is an offensive. In other words, if Ukraine wants these tanks, it's to roll through and reacquire territory that the Russians have acquired. But of course, the Russians will see it as, wait a minute, if those tanks can roll into that territory, they can keep rolling past the border into Russian territory, right?
They're inherently paranoid, and absolutely they're going to look at that way.
Gotcha.
And I'm not saying it's the right way to look. I'm just saying that's the way the Russians will look at it.
You mentioned General Milley. General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense. Their names are associated with this apparent hesitation to commit tanks. That's a big deal. Up until now, everyone's been on the same page. Now you have Milley and Austin's names associated with a story that says the Pentagon is saying, whoa, whoa, maybe we don't want to do this. What do you say? What do you read into that?
So I think, unfortunately, I'm going to say something that your audience may not like. I'm just going to say it. I think we're in a position right now, Larry, of 1965, 66 LBJ. I think you've got a President Biden who was committed us to this war no matter what. And now you have wiser voices, and I say that with a great deal of a bit of disdain in some ways, but I appreciate the fact that both Milley, who I know, and Austin, who I worked for in Afghanistan, have said, the wiser voices in the Pentagon, Larry, have finally percolated up to the leadership.
You're generally not great fans of these guys, but the fact that they seem to be the wiser voices in the room, and you're acknowledging that, actually says quite a bit.
I am.
Yeah.
I am, yes.
There's another part of the story that I don't understand. That's why you're here. Help me understand. This whole idea that U.S. would commit our M1 tanks to the Ukrainian effort is coming at the urging of Germany. Now, I'm no geography major, but last I checked, Germany's a lot closer to Ukraine than, here on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. If Germany thinks it's such a great idea to give Ukraine tanks, they've got plenty of them. We've seen German tanks plowing through that continent for, 100 years. Why don't they give Ukraine their tanks?
So, Larry, that's right. So there's 4 categories of tank nations they want: Abrams, Leopard, which is the German, Challenger, or Leclerc from the French. So, and the Germans were the ones who said, "Oh yeah, we can do this." And then they remembered, oh my goodness, our population's not really for this. The Germans, if we do too much, they're going to get really upset with us. And secondly, they don't want the Russians upset with it, and they know it's going to happen because they live in Europe, we don't. They depend on the Russians even today for gas. This would be something that goes directly against the German foreign policy. So they're saying, "Hey, you guys do it. You don't live here." That long stretch of logistics is a good thing. But one of the things that's true of all these tanks, Larry, is that nobody believes that the Ukrainians will prevail. That's the other elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about here. The Ukrainians just don't have the manpower necessary to actually adequately man an army, even with armor, to go achieve a victory. And of course, the fear is then, well, every tank you give them is going to end up in the hands of Russia. And we still have classified technology, Chabam Army, which is still classified technically on the M1. I know the Challengers have that technology. I know the Germans have technology they consider classified. Nobody wants the Russians to get a big technology advantage by getting all these advanced armor vehicles, these tanks that we have invested in. So that's another issue that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody thinks they're going to win.
We've already handed a bunch of our technology to the Taliban by leaving it in Afghanistan. Why would we put it in the hands of the Russians?
Fourth largest army in the world. Yep.
Tony Shaffer, thank you. It's always clarifying. Appreciate you joining us. You're watching Salem News Channel. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.